I'm talking about the Slave Patrol. Next. When one thinks about policing in early America, there are a few images that may come to mind. A county sheriff enforcing a debt between neighbors, a constable serving an arrest warrant on horseback, or a lone night watchman carrying a lantern through his sleeping town. These organized practices were adopted to the colonies from England and formed the foundation of American law enforcement. However, there is another significant origin of American policing that we cannot forget, and that is slave patrol. You have to realize that the American South relied almost exclusively on slave labor, and white Southerners lived in near constant fear of slave rebellion, disrupting this economic status quo. As a result, these patrols were one of the earliest and most prolific forms of early policing in the South. The responsibility of patrols was straightforward: to control the movements and behaviors of enslaved populations. And they did this by focusing on three objectives. Number one, to chase down, apprehend, and return to their owners runaway slaves. Number two, to provide a form of organized terror to deter slave revolt. And number three, to maintain a form of discipline for slave workers who were subject to summary justice outside the law. Organized policing was one of the many types of social controls imposed on enslaved African Americans in the South. Physical and psychological violence took many forms, including an overseer's brutal whip, the international breakup of families, deprivation of food and other necessities, and the private employment of slave catchers to track down runaways. The history of police work in the South grows out of these early fascinations by white patrollers with what African American slaves were doing. Most law enforcement was, by definition, white patrolmen watching, catching, or beating black slaves. Now, the process of how one became a patroller differed throughout the colonies. Some governments ordered local militias to select patrollers from their rosters of white men in the region within a certain age range. That's right, the United States government legislated slave patrol. In many areas, patrollers were made up of lower class and wealthy, land-owning white men alike. Other areas pulled names from lists of local landowners. And in the 18th century, South Carolina land-owning white women were also included in the potential list of names to be selected to become patrollers. If they were called to duty, they were given the option to identify a male substitute to patrol in their place. They first formed in 1704 in South Carolina. Patrols lasted over 150 years, only technically ending with the abolition of slavery during the Civil War. However, just because the patrols lost their lawful status did not mean that their influence died out in 1865. After the Civil War, Southern police departments often carried over aspects of the patrols. These included systematic surveillance, the enforcement of curfews, and even notions of who could become a police officer. Though a small number of African Americans joined the police force in the South during Reconstruction, they met active resistance. Though law enforcement look very different today, the professions developed from practices implemented in the colonies, better known as slave patrol. And so now that we had a little history on the slave patrol, let's look at a couple of images here that I want to bring before you, and let's examine them, and you determine to yourself if the slave patrol has truly been disbanded or not. All right. Here now, when you look at the images that's on the screen before you, to my right, you would see that there are two badges. The two badges represent the badges that the slave patrollers would have on their persons. And the badge on the top shows, when you look at the badge on the top and then look at the badge beneath it, it shows the progression of the slave patrol and how they implemented their badge. And remember, as we said, that this was legislated by the United States government. Notice how the first one simply says Runaway Slave Patrol, but the one underneath says, it gives you a description of a plantation police. Then it tells you from South Carolina, and it also says Runaway Slave Patrol. Now, here to my left are the badges used in our day and time. And you happen to see an NOPD badge. And interesting enough, this NOPD badge has embedded on it the colors of the LGBTQ community. Interesting. Maybe I'll do a snack on that one day, but because they all work together, they all go hand in hand. And then underneath the New Orleans police badge, there is a Jefferson Parish badge, a Jefferson Parish Deputy Sheriff badge. Now, they say that the slave patrol is no longer. But what do you notice about the badges? Well, the first thing you would notice about the badge is that they've dropped the word plantation, but they kept the word police and patrol and officer. They also kept the image of the star. The star means something, and this star symbolizes something. Biblically speaking, a star symbolizes an angelic life, an angelic being. The star represents angels, it represents enlightenment. And if you know anything about the satanic cult, you would realize that the person they call the enlightened one is no shorter than the person known as Satan himself. As a matter of fact, the Bible even mentions the image of a star in the Old Testament and the New Testament. If you would research, if you would, in your Bible, the pagan god Malak. God warned the children of Israel about following Malak. And Malak's image was, you guessed it, a star. Now here's the interesting thing about Malak as a pagan god. Malak, also known as Melech, aka Baal, and aka Satan. All these titles refer to the Dark One himself. Now Malak, when you research the story of Malak in the Bible, I don't have time in this snack to do it now. However, you would discover that God warned the children of Israel not to let their children pass through the fire of Malak. In other words, child sacrifice was known to be made to this god. Could that be a coincidence that these individuals who are assigned or claiming to be assigned to protect the lives of the citizens of this world, especially the black citizens, are killing our children? Could there be some kind of coalition of child sacrifice going on behind this symbol? One thing about symbols that you have to realize and understand is that any symbol that has been set apart and dedicated towards a certain entity, it still holds power towards that entity. And these individuals could be wearing this badge and not really realizing that they're being influenced by this star. At least I hold you too long. Let's go to the next image. Now these are the badges. Now let's look at the handcuffs. To my right is the slave handcuff, and to my left is the handcuffs we use today. Now let's go to the final images, and then I'll give closing remarks, and we'll close out this historical snack. Now here to my right, the image on top and the image on bottom is images of excessive force being applied to an African American, a person of color. Notice in the images that there are, in the top image, there are more than one officer on site. Now I know I can hear what you're saying. Well, Nigel, there are some good officers. There are some good police officers. All of them are not that way. That is true. I agree with you. As a matter of fact, they are so good and so loyal that they will not even interfere in the wrongful doing of excessive force, even if they are on the scene while it's going down. While the excessive force is taking place, notice that they will not involve themselves to try and prevent their fellow officer from carrying out excessive force. And there's a reason behind that. But before I get into the reason behind that, let me show you, look at the image to my left. Now the image to my left is a recent image. As a matter of fact, this white guy in this image just recently, I believe this week, the beginning of this week, killed 10 people. But look at how he's greeted by the law enforcement officers. You don't see excessive force. As a matter of fact, you see them, when you look at the video image of it, you see them carefully escorting him. Now, this is a killer. If there's any person that you want to apply excessive force in apprehending to, you think it would be someone who just killed 10 people, and one of them for sure was a police officer. But look at the difference in how the law enforcement handled the person of white skin compared to the black skin individual. Now, here's the thing. Here's my final thoughts on the matter. The police officers are like a fraternity. Yes, they swear to uphold and to protect the law and individuals, but they also do the same towards each other. And police officers will never go against each other. Once again, you can say, well, it's just maybe just the good police officers were never on site when they applied excessive force to George Floyd and killed him and killed the other black citizens wrongfully. Well, this is one thing that may be a fact, but I also know that if they were so good, how come if not one of these so-called good officers who were not present made an open protest against the wrongful death of these black citizens? Now, I may be wrong, and if I'm wrong, please hit me up in the comments and share with me the link where they had one officer, one good officer. I'm not asking for more than one, but just one to prove me wrong. One good officer that stood up and protested openly to the media. Now, another interesting thing is that in most of these cases, there were more than one officers on the scene when these black people were killed wrongfully. Notice how the media never interviewed the officers that were on site. Notice how only the police chief was put out in front of the media like a puppet to answer the questions the way they were told to respond to these questions. And there's a reason for that, as I suggested. And I would refer you to, in closing, Agenda 2030. In the Agenda 2030, you got to realize that the Agenda 2030 is the goals of this government, the goals of this world, to implement some things, to put in place some things in the beast system. The beast system. That's right. Now, like I say, you Bible students know that Paul alluded once in the Bible that Satan himself is in control of this age. So his system, before he can reveal himself, there are certain things that have to be in place for him to come up on the scene and reveal himself. And that will bring the beast system to its highest point. And it'll be full engagement in the beast system. And the 2030 agenda is a part of this one world, one collective world government, one world currency, one world religion. As a matter of fact, as it pertains to law enforcement and what we're seeing in the streets today, while we're seeing our children being sacrificed towards the beast on the streets, and we're seeing protesters protesting. Now, you got to understand that the Black Lives Matter has been infiltrated. It's already been infiltrated by those who control this world, just as the Black Panthers were infiltrated, and Martin Luther King's civil rights organization was infiltrated, and even the black Muslims were infiltrated when Malcolm X was on the scene, and still are today. And see, and what they're trying to do is, because they have what they call Agenda 16, which deals with peace, justice, and right institutions. And right institutions, strong institutions, in other words. What the hand behind the scene is doing, in case you don't notice, in order for them to push a legislation for you to vote on and to believe is necessary, they got to create a scene for you to believe that it is necessary. So they're going to create chaos. It's always the same method with these people. They create chaos, and then they come with the answer to the chaos. And because of the fear of life and the fear of our children being put to death by law enforcement on the streets, you'll be surprised how many people would blindly support these legislations. Now you got to understand that they're trying to bring it full circle, and all these things must be in place. Now they call it the 2030 agenda because their goal is to have all of their agendas implemented by year 2030. So the beast system is designed to implement some things that have to be in place before Satan reveals himself in earth and take his place as the false Messiah. And that's when it's going to really get serious for the believers in the world. You say that you love Jesus, you say that you would die for Jesus, well, the time is coming where you would have to prove how much you love Jesus, when your life is threatened, when you have to make a public decision and public choice of either you gonna worship this world system or worship the Christ, the true God, then you would be put to death. We'll see how many of the true Christians will stand with the Christ. Well, I certainly hope you enjoyed this historical snack on the slave patrol and the comparison of the slave patrol to our modern day police officers, for that's what they were birthed out of. Until next time, God bless you.